Hi, my name is Jeannie Wilkenine. I use she, her pronouns. I am a class of 2012 alum. I went to U of A and majored in chemical engineering. And then after that, spent a year getting a master's in the UK on a Churchill scholarship in earth sciences, and then a PhD back in the US at Berkeley in environmental engineering. And so my background is really in kind of environmental science and climate, and currently based in DC, working in that more in the policy realm. And my favorite Flinn memory is that in our class, we had a really small cohort at U of A. So there were only 6 of us out of our class. And so we had a tradition where every year on the first day of classes, we'd always have dinner together and sort of like check in and like talk through what we were excited about for the year, maybe if we were like struggling through anything. And it was something that we continued all through our time there. And then since we've graduated, so I think we're going on like 13 years or something now, although it's admittedly far more annoying to schedule now that folks are like scattered across the world. So yeah, but excited to talk through it, and really I hope to offer kind of my perspective more on the sort of academia, research, grad school, fellowship applications kind of front.
Great, thanks. Alex, would you mind going next?
Hey, I'm Alex Token. I am a 2015 Flinn Scholar, graduated U of A in 2019 with a physics background. I then went straight into the workforce and I work for a NASA contractor. And so what that means is I work on site at a NASA facility, but I work for a company. So I can talk a little bit about both the corporate job application process and resume, which is what I went through, as well as I've had a lot of insight into the actual government civil service application and job process, which are a bit different. But my day-to-day job is data science and machine learning applied to space. So that is what I do day to day, and really excited to be here with you. My favorite Flinn experience is the retreat. It was a great time to see all of my classmates for the first time. And I have to say that I am part of the back to back to back to back tug of war champion 2019 class. So I've heard, we're a pretty legendary year.
Oh my God, I forgot about the tug of war. Also a champion class. Very happy to hear it. All right, and Charles.
Yeah, Jeannie and I are in the same class. I don't think we ever won. No. Yeah, we lost Alex's year 1 year. So hi everyone, I'm Charles. I went to ASU as a microbiology major. I was pre-med until the very last semester of undergrad and then decided I wanted to work in industry. So I have the unique perspective of taking a research-based resume and trying to find a job in the workforce. I started in industrial supply management at a company called McMaster-Carr. Also got a couple of graduate degrees that they paid for. So I've been very lucky with Flinn combo to have a few degrees that allowed me to pivot into more business. So after my MBA at Northwestern, I went and worked at Snapchat in Snap Labs specifically. So we worked on augmented reality hardware. And then I left that to buy a demolition company. And so now I live in Colorado and do demolition for places like the Air Force Academy or Amtrak stations or things like that. So my experience is probably going to be a little bit more from the management perspective. I've used my resume a lot, but I've actually reviewed probably a lot more as a manager. And so I'll talk a little bit more on the more, I guess, cookie cutter resume approach compared to academia. My favorite Flinn memory was all the travel that we did as a class and actually as a group of all 4 classes outside of the Flinn sanctioned events. And so we did things like go to the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta, go camping, went to camp on the beach in San Diego. And some of those memories and learning from your peers is the thing that I take away the most from my Flinn experience. All the other experiences are great, but I think you all know what that's like. I think I would encourage you to learn from each other as much as possible outside of the sanctioned events as well.
All right, thank you guys for sharing. All right, so the first question, I'm going to have Charles answer first, if that's okay. I'm just picking at random. So how do you decide which extracurricular activities and honors to include when you have a long list of involvement?
Okay, this was the one question that I thought I might pass to someone else. My list wasn't that long. Because I was so focused on the pre-med track, I was almost entirely in on research. I mean, every single day I was in research. I think that the most important thing that you're going to want to show are things that not only are tailored to what you're looking for, but as an undergrad, that's kind of tough. But really things, I would prioritize things that show that you're a quick learner, you have potential for leadership, and that you're a team player. When it comes to potential for leadership, though, I want to be very specific that you need to show initiative that you took on something. It doesn't necessarily mean that you led others. It just means that you showed that you were ready to take on a little bit extra and maybe push the team in a direction that they wouldn't have otherwise gone, while also being a team player. And so you have to be someone that the rest of the team can view as someone they would want on their team, someone they would want to hang out with outside of work. That combination is really, really effective if you can describe that.
Jeannie or Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I think Charles, even though you didn't want it, you did pretty well. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think definitely I agree with sort of, I think Heidi mentioned this approach of like keeping a long version, and then like whenever you're going to apply something, then you to kind of pull out, you know, what you want to include. So I would say regardless, like always make sure you're kind of keeping that long version. I agree, definitely kind of relevant, but you can also think about it, especially for some settings, if there's things that can help sort of round you out in a way. So for instance, like say you're involved in outreach of some sort and you're applying to, you know, graduate school, that kind of signals skills that like you could also be good at teaching and things that maybe you don't have kind of exhibited in your other activities. And then, so, you know, think about that as well. There's kind of, you know, components that, you know, are relevant, but maybe in a more kind of holistic way. And then I would say kind of all else equal, just go for what's most recent.
One follow up on that is that certainly after sophomore year and maybe even after freshman year, everything but your maybe log line of the high school you went to can be taken off your resume, unless it's something like super, super cool. Like if you won one of the international science fairs or something, keep that on. But everything other than that, your high school clubs, etc., can sort of be dropped after your freshman year and certainly shouldn't remain on after your sophomore year. Like the others said, keeping a long list of things that you're doing. I called mine an activity log, with not just all of the activities, but everything with 7 or 8 bullet points that you had about it. Because when you're going and customizing your resume for a specific application, you don't just want to pick the activities that are most relevant, you want to pick the bullet points that are most relevant too. So having a lot of that pre-written so that you can sort of form fill with your own content later is super helpful. And then the figuring out exactly what belongs there would be kind of the number one resume tip that I would have, is to read the application criteria, because they give you a lot of information in that. And most people look at the job description and they think, oh, hey, I know what this thing that I'm applying to entails. But they really put a lot of important details in everything below that top level description. So read that. And off of that, when you start reading those line by line, like, oh, hey, I have something that I think might relate to, you know, this third sentence they had. That's when you know that that's something you should include in your resume for that job.
Oh, excellent answers. And I'm so glad you brought up the job description. People do not look at that bottom part as much as we spend a lot of time writing those as employers, and we love it when you pay attention. So moving on to another question. Jeannie, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you on this one. What's something you should never include in your resume?
I don't know if people do this anymore, which is maybe for the best, but when there's sort of unnecessary personal details in there, like I think like sometimes you'll see sort of templates about like where your citizenship is, or like weird like marital status and things. Like don't put that on there. Yeah, I would say like unnecessary personal details. So definitely like that blatant listing, but like just anything else that sort of like offers them more of a view into your personal life than they need to know. I would say leave it off.
People absolutely still do include that, and that is
Well, okay.
wonderful to call out. I recently, as a year ago, saw that.
Okay, yeah, don't do that. It's on some templates, but don't do
Yes,
it.
it is. It's out there in the internet, sadly. Alex or Charles, anything else? Anything on your list that you would never want to see included?
So for me, a few thoughts come to mind. The first is anything passive. So if something happened to you, it's not going to matter to the person reading it, right? We could talk about action verbs and all that type of stuff and from a more practical standpoint, but in general, when you're deciding the type of content to include, as someone who reads a lot of resumes, I really don't care if something happened to you. I want to see that you went and did something or got something or took care of it. Another thing is personality for personality's sake, as Jeannie already mentioned. And then I personally, and this is maybe just me, I don't think that any undergrad should have an executive summary. You're not an executive. It's just the reality. I don't put an executive summary. I don't think I've seen any for any, like the only reason I would see an executive summary is for an actual executive who, when you see the resume come in the job arena, you wonder why they're leaving. Right. And so if they need to answer that type of a question where they're a 40-year vet in the industry and suddenly they're applying to a job that's completely different, then maybe you need an executive summary to add some context. But we all know that undergrads are just looking for a job, or you're looking for the coolest thing to do or something to pass the time. And there's no shame in that whatsoever. So like, why take up space and basically say nothing? That's the thing I would leave out.
Building on what Charles said, you don't need your picture, save space. And anything that isn't actively helping your resume is not a good use of the space that you have. You have a very limited amount of space. So if it's something that you are not super proud of or that doesn't apply particularly to this job, save the line and use it somewhere else. Especially applicable to that summary. Very few undergrads have something interesting to say there. Very few people, not just undergrads.
Alex, I'm going to start with you on the next one. What's the most significant change someone can make to their resume to make it stand out?
Yeah, this is a tough one. And I would say here would be to reorganize it to highlight the important things near the top. So one of the other questions we were given as a panel that I will briefly step on is how do you read a resume? And I almost always do read it top to bottom. Maybe my eyes drift toward education first, but in terms of your experiences section, that really is the meat of the resume and you can format it however you want. So if you have a leadership experience that you think is the highlight of your entire resume, instead of just having a broad experiences section that has all of your experiences chronologically, have a leadership section first, because maybe that leadership experience happened 2 years ago, but you want to raise it to the top. Have a brief leadership section, then have a work experiences section. If, however, you have a bunch of experiences that chronologically do fit super well, you can do that. So within that big media experiences section, you can be creative in your organization. Keep it generally chronological, but you can create as many subsections as you need to bubble up the still chronologically relevant sections to the top that highlight your bright star moments.
I like it. Excellent perspective. Jeannie or Charles, do you have anything else you wanted to add to that? Or maybe Jeannie from an academic perspective?
Jeannie, go first.
Yeah.
Oh no. So, well, one thing I was going to say is that, and maybe this is like a cop-out answer, is that it's not necessarily so much about the resume, but the more you can build your network to where you're sending the resume to, is a good way to kind of make it stand out. So, I think and I'm someone that hates networking. I hate the idea of networking, but it is important and it does work. And the more you can kind of just take advantage of that and keep sort of like adding people to your circle, like it does pay dividends kind of down the line because if someone's hiring and maybe you just talk to them a little bit at a conference before, like that goes a long way. And especially for like in academic positions, like a lot of it's sort of the like academic family nepotism of like someone you worked with, their friend from grad school is hiring someone. And so like you just have to kind of like work your connections that way. So I would say that is kind of my sort of answer. So it's not so much, like obviously you want a good resume that you're sending to them, but if you can kind of use your network to your advantage to sort of prime the reception of that resume, that'll, really help you stand out.
Yeah, Jeannie's answer is the real answer here. Your resume, no matter how impressive, will not matter at all if someone is networking and beating you on that. So please keep that in mind with all of this. Your resume should be your closer. You should be opening the relationship, opening the conversation, and getting to the finish line, and then using the resume to push yourself over the edge at the very end of the process, in my opinion. Going back to what Alex said about how he reads a resume, I'm call me lazy. I read basically the first phrase of every line, top to bottom. And so my tip would be, you need an active verb to be the very first word on every single line. So something along the lines of, like, if I was going down a resume, I want to see, owned this, defined this, developed this, leveraged this, managed this, led that. And I don't even care about the rest before I move on to the next resume, potentially, at least at the very beginning, right? There are other things that you would want to add, like, actually showing impact and results and, like quantitative stuff at the end of that. But really, if you don't have any action going on at the very beginning of your line, there's a good chance that your reader or your interviewer is not even looking that far. So that's one thing that I would recommend. The other thing is, if you want to stand out, I would say that you should be ready to really show passion or expertise, and it doesn't matter what that is. We talked about not adding personality for personality's sake, but if you have something in which you've actually become a real expert and can show passion about, that is actually a great way to stand out. Another one of the potential questions that Karen shared was, like, what is like the coolest, like maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with the lightning round, but like the coolest non-academic thing. I met someone who had an asteroid named after him. Like, that's pretty cool. And he did it as a hobbyist, and he discovered an asteroid with his telescope at home in some way, like, which is just blew my mind in the first place. But I wouldn't put it past the Flinn group to have someone like that. So I want to put it out there that if you have an experience like that, that is more than just personality for personality's sake, and showing a real passion that you'd be able to speak about is a great way to show off.
So thanks, Charles, for also bringing up, it's important to remember that people are reading a lot of resumes, and so they don't spend every moment reading everything you say or every line in there, or even finishing the sentence. I am absolutely guilty of that as well, Charles, when you're doing like intern resume review and you've got 500 to read, which is literally what you'll have sometimes. You just gotta, you do a filter round, and you want to make it past that filter round. So this next question, Jeannie, I'd love to start with you, but this kind of dovetails into that nicely. Of, if you collaborated on a major initiative or research project, how do you convey your specific contributions without overstating or underselling them, but still, standing out enough that we're going to want to talk to you?
Yeah, so I would say particularly if it's like you're in the sort of science or research world, it's expected that kind of everything is a collaboration. These days there's very little kind of like science that is kind of done by a singular person. And I think a lot of that collaboration is a skill and a strength in and of itself. So, don't think that's a kind of weakness, that it's not something you did all by yourself. Like, think about, are there, specific examples of like what that collaboration yielded, or maybe, especially kind of as you work your way up, maybe you're mentoring other people that are coming into the research group or something like that. Like, count that. But I would also say, don't oversell like what your specific role is. So like what your kind of activities were and contributions in the project, I would say be clear about that, but I think it's okay to sort of speak to what the broader impact of kind of the holistic project was in your bullet points. So if you were, doing analyses that supported, this new discovery, I think that's fine to say, even though it wasn't like your analyses individually sort of did that. So I would say, it's expected. I would say be transparent. Don't feel like you're hiding it. The other thing too is, especially if you are moving more to like a research academic route, is once you have to start listing like publications and presentations, a lot of the sort of kind of contribution level you played in anything is sort of signaled through the author order. So in academics, like the order with which authors are listed on a paper or a presentation, there's like a very specific way that it's done, where usually like first author is the real kind of owner of the project. Your last author is probably like the professor who got the money for it. And then like all the people in the middle like played some role, but maybe aren't like the lead on it. So that's something too that like people know how to kind of interpret that, and it's expected.
Yeah, I can add a perspective here. Agree with everything Jeannie said. And just to build on that, you should be able to answer a interview question related to this project with sufficient detail on like a broad level, like what the project's aims were, and then a detailed level on your contributions. And so when someone is reading this chunk of your resume, they should be able to pick out, okay, what things can I ask them detailed questions about and expect a good answer? And so if your resume is sort of an intro to an interview, which you would hope that it is, you want to make sure that whatever you are detailing in maybe your second or third bullet point is something that you're prepared to speak in depth about if asked. And since that's what you did, you hopefully do know that really well. And Jeannie gave a great phrase, so I just typed it in the chat as well on one way to phrase all of that.
Yeah, one thing that I would add is any reader is evaluating whether you're going to join their team, most likely. And so the one thing to think about is in terms of not overstating or understating your impact is just show that you added some value. It really doesn't need to be that you discovered the next, the miracle of life or something along those lines. Really just show that even if you're not an expert, you're someone who made it easier for the other team members. And showing a skill to be a great collaborator is equally powerful, especially as an undergrad coming in, because you will be the least experienced person in the room. And so no one's bringing you in as a consultant to be an expert or something along those lines. They're bringing you on to add value to the team, to make the team more efficient overall. And so just like we talk about tailoring resumes to an industry or a particular job, keep in mind that your audience is actually someone who's just asking for someone to provide leverage to the team.
Just like you read my mind, Charles. The next question I was going to ask is, how do you tailor your resume when applying to different job opportunities, jobs versus grad school versus fellowships? And I was going to start with Alex, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'll pick up on a thread that I laid out a bit earlier, and that is first reading the job description and understanding in detail what it's asking of you. And so someone jokingly said earlier, put those keywords in white at the bottom. I wouldn't really recommend that. However, I would recommend finding a way to put those things that are required somewhere in your resume and make sure that if they ask for 2 years of MATLAB experience, you display like the word MATLAB, as well as maybe it's a full bullet point, like did MATLAB in support of this project, this research project, or in these courses. And so it's about tailoring those bullet points to the specific requirements, the basic requirements, as well as the preferred requirements of the job itself. And so one way to do that is from looking at the job description. The next way of doing that is by looking at online resumes of people who are applying to jobs in similar fields, as well as a lot of you may be applying for internships. And so it has become more of a trend since I graduated, but I've seen it a bit where people are building their personal websites and putting their resumes and CVs, even in undergrad, on those websites. And so oftentimes you can see who, got some REU internships, et cetera. And you can go to their personal website and they'll actually be putting in public their resume and CV because this is great for their personal brand, but it also can help you get a feel for what are they doing for their formatting, what things are they think are critical here, and how was a successful resume viewed. And so getting kind of a broad view of what others' resumes look like can help you find your style for tailoring there.
Jeannie, did you have anything you wanted to add? Or?
Well, yeah, so I think for this question, I could speak a little bit more to the like maybe going for kind of jobs versus maybe more like grad school or fellowships. And I think, we keep kind of saying like tailor, read the job description. But the problem is for grad school, there's not a job description. So, I think in that it's sort of like nice, but also not nice because generally it's going to be just far more open-ended in terms of kind of what they're looking for, how you might fit that. I would say like some of the general things probably like grad school advisors and admissions committees are looking for is, and from my experience being on an admissions committee for grad school is, we're looking for like, do you have some of the, base coursework and preparation from your undergraduate degree in a way that we think is going to make you successful for what you're going to have to take in your graduate degree. So for instance, when I was reviewing engineering applications, we wanted to make sure that they had at least taken like a year of calculus in undergrad. So there's kind of some of that. But then I think particularly if you're looking for kind of research or graduate school positions, there's a lot more of these sort of more general traits often people are looking for. So it might be like problem solving. So, you know, can you sort of talk about a time where, you know, maybe you ran into some issue, you were able to solve it, think creatively, kind of go, you know, be a self-starter, because that's kind of what a lot of research is. You're like left to deal with your own problems. Do you have sort of, you know, some stories of maybe grit where you've kind of, you know, shown kind of these abilities? And in some ways, I think a lot of those more sort of personal traits often are a little bit more like what people might be looking for, even than kind of certain skills, because the whole point of going to grad school is you're there to learn new skills. That being said, you know, if they are looking for like someone to come do a specific thing for some research position, you know, if you have experience doing, you know, mass spec work, like obviously you want to kind of say that if it's going to be relevant. So, you know, I think there's less tailoring that happens, but it's also kind of harder because you don't actually kind of know what you're necessarily pitching for. And then the other big difference I would say is that oftentimes too, when you're applying to graduate school or fellowships, it's going to be part of a broader application packet. So, you know, you have your kind of resume CV. I would say kind of like when I applied to grad school, I had sort of this like hybrid resume CV. But you also have like statements, those are really important, transcripts, rec letters. You may have to do a research proposal depending on the kind of program. So I would say just like it's important, but it almost becomes, I think, a little less important than it does in kind of applying for maybe non-academic, non-research positions, because it's part of this kind of bigger package that they're going to be reviewing. And also, as far as I know, it's always humans kind of reading these things still. So that's another little difference.
Yeah, I'll add on. Jeannie has the best split between the two different ways that she would tailor something. For me, I have always had two resumes, one more with an operations focus because that was kind of how the beginning of my career started, and the other is a little bit more like a tech type focus because that's where I ended. However, both of them I also considered outside of industry how I was tailoring those exact traits that she mentioned. So on one side, for example, on the tech side, it was all about leadership in going from 0 to 1, taking an idea and making it into a reality in some way, which is a different story than taking something that exists and making it more efficient, which, you know, that's maybe it's a small nuance there, but I actually also made sure that even if I had the same experiences on both resumes, I was tailoring them to kind of build a narrative in one direction or another from a trait perspective. So if you're someone who is like, I'm in USG or something like that, and I'm going to be a president or a senator for my class or something along those lines, and you want to talk about, you know, maybe civic leadership or something in that vein, then even if you had some like research internship or something like that, I would make sure that that is tailored in a way that shows that you were doing something to help with your skill set in the USG position or something along those lines. So the trait narrative is something that I would, it's kind of like for bonus points, but if you really wanted to have like the best resume, not only would you be describing the technical abilities differently for each one, but I would also talk about some of your traits and how those have developed over time.
All right. And so I wanted to make time for the lightning round here. So how this is going to work is I'm going to ask a question and then I'll call on the panelists to give me as brief as they can, 30 to 60 seconds, their response. I'm actually think it'd be fun to get all of you to answer each one because it'll be interesting to see if they're different. If you don't have anything to add, you can just say pass and we'll move on to the next one. But I would think your perspectives are different enough that it'd be nice to hear from all of you. All right. Are you ready, panelists, for the lightning round? Okay. We're going to start with, we'll start with Charles on this one. One word or phrase you never want to see on a resume.
Detail oriented with no data to back it up.
Or a typo, that's my favorite. Jeannie.
Yeah.
Efficient or efficiency.
Mm.
I think it often is used in a way that is meaningless.
Alex.
Expert. Don't tell me you're an expert. Show me you're an expert.
Excellent. All right, next one. We're gonna start with Jeannie. Best resume advice you ever received or wish you had received earlier.
So I had a professor in undergrad who told me, starting out, focus on trying to like add one good bullet point to your resume each semester as a way to sort of like think through the pacing.
All right, and then we'll do Charles next on this one.
Yeah, I think active language, something that people really take for granted, especially actually if you come from academia. You have to write in a passive language when you're writing research proposals or a thesis or something along those lines. And so I was coming from that world, and then going into business, man, was that a rude awakening when I just sounded like the most passive person ever compared to my competition. So active language.
All right, now Alex.
This is a repeat from before, but you don't just have one resume, you have one activity log and as many resumes as you have applications.
Excellent. All right, Alex, biggest resume myth you'd love to debunk.
Oh, don't have a great one for this, so I'll pass.
All right, move on. Jeannie or Alex, either one of you have one?
I will say the myth that CVs are just long resumes. They're actually pretty different.
Absolutely heard that before.
That's a great one. I would say that, I already said it earlier, no executive summaries. Please get rid of those unless you're an executive.
Even then, I don't know. I've seen very few when I was working with some like Fortune 500, CFOs, CEOs, and we already know they're executives. All right. So Charles, what is your go-to action verb? You love an action verb or phrase you would always recommend?
Always is a strong word. But my standout one that I actually really like is owned. Showing that you're a decision maker or someone at the end of the line who has to make the final call is something that I would really strive for in whatever experience you're trying to get. And it could be the smallest thing. You owned the smallest decision, but at least you owned it and you got to be kind of a leader in that way.
Love it. All right. Alex.
This is tailored to a very like technical position, but I want to hear what you implemented. So if you implemented some tough to do technique, I want to see that.
All right.
I think something along the lines of like advocate or convinced. I think that kind of shows me that you can sort of piece together an evidence-based argument and that you're kind of passionate about things.
All right. Okay, next one. Jeannie, I'll start with you since you were last one to speak. One section you always read first when reviewing a resume.
Education. I think that's sort of like the base of your sort of qualifications in academia. Is people always kind of want to know where you got your degrees from, what were they in?
All right. Charles, how about you?
Just the left side, actually. I want to see the beginning. If you've shown impact from a verb standpoint, then I will look at the evidence to back it up and see how much impact you have.
All right. Alex.
For me, it's also education. One of our biggest concerns is, can a new hire actually do the job? And so in addition to the degree, we actually find it helpful to know your relevant coursework, especially from the later years of your undergraduate, or if you progress to graduate school, like a master's degree or anything, what graduate courses really apply to this job so that I'm confident that you can jump in and work right alongside us.
All right. One thing I will say is dates are one thing I would skim for, because sometimes people would act like they were an expert in something or they like really own something and they did it for like 6 weeks. And I love it. I love the enthusiasm, but come on, guys. All right. So
I will say, do not list Harvard on your resume if you went to like the summer program or something like that. I feel like this crew actually might. Yeah, I feel like this crew actually might intern and actually do something really cool at those places, but do not list it on your education, please.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with short-term things. It's just the language around it's very telling to me in a resume. So Alex, most impressive non-academic experience you've seen on a resume.
Extreme hiking. Someone did the PCT after their undergrad, and I thought that was super cool. And like Jeannie hinted at earlier, it showed grit, it showed endurance, it showed willpower. It was awesome.
Yeah, if anything, it'll get you an interview. If it's interesting enough, the people will want to talk more about it. Jeannie, do you have one?
I don't know if it's most impressive, but something I was always impressed by, especially in admissions committees, was when people like started something at their school. So just kind of speaks to me that there's someone that can kind of like see a gap and like take the initiative and leadership to fill it.
Right. And Charles, this was your favorite. You mentioned it before, so
Yeah.
oh, that's right. All right. So Charles, font or formatting choice, and someone did ask a font question, but I saw it was answered, that instantly makes a resume look polished to you.
Yeah, so I think the three of us will probably each have different answers for this. I don't like pictures. I don't like those types of things in your resume. I go very basic. I think I use a Garamond, like font size 11. I mean, basically Times New Roman for me. But coming from tech, it depends. Again, you have to tailor everything to the job. And tech, if you come with that resume, you're just tossed out. I mean, I actually very strongly consider leaving my MBA off my resume for tech. So just keep that in mind when you are tailoring your resume. You need to be considering font as well.
Alex, did you have a font or formatting?
Consistency is the number one thing for me. Between all of your headings, your subheadings, etc., they should be consistent. I personally do like a serif for headings and sans serif for the main type, just to differentiate. And then not too small. So think about if you can't read it from a foot and a half away, staring at your screen, nobody else can, and the other person isn't going to be trying very hard either. They're going to look at it for 13 seconds, and if it's too hard for them in those 13 seconds, they're not even going to read your name.
Jeannie, anything you want to add?
I'll just kind of +1 all that. The biggest thing, just like make it easier to read, especially as you move to CV world, because those bad boys are long. So the more you can kind of see where actual sections are and what's going on, that's helpful.
There are strong opinions about serif and sans serif in the resume world, just so you know. Sans serif tends to be more popular with the tech crowd because it's all screen, and some of the more older school will be serif font people. But it is interesting how we used to have raging debates with our marketing team at my investment management company about the two font options. So definitely look into your business. I recommend looking at their website or things like that and seeing what fonts they choose, and then you might want to mirror, because the person looking at it will have a weirdly strong emotional opinion, and no one is actually right here, but you will learn a lot from that firm because their CEO and others will have an opinion about the fonts that they choose for their website. Believe it or not, these are the things adults spend their time on. All right, and then starting with Jeannie, this is our last one. One thing you'd change about your undergraduate resume.
So much. To prepare for this, I looked up my undergraduate resume, like my very first semester at U of A, and it was embarrassing. I had a bullet point that was just like conducted research. And so I would just burn it, the whole thing. It was bad. Yeah, I think that also, I don't know if it came up, but check for typos. I had a typo on my resume for a long time in undergrad, and that's just embarrassing. No one wants to see that. So yeah, detail, typos, and you know, it's a long road. You'll keep it, it'll grow, it'll get better.
Right. Alex or Charles?
I took the laundry list approach in college and small font, and I would have cut like at least half of it, made the font a little bigger, talked more impactfully about the things that were important, and just dropped things that were truly not relevant.
Yeah, I think showing that you have some clarity in your writing will go a long way for your undergrad resume. There was a question earlier in the chat asking about font style and recommendations. In terms of font size, I really would be surprised if any undergrad needs to go down to font size 10. You really, if you're really trying to squeeze stuff in and you're a sophomore or junior in college, then you probably have too much detail or unnecessary detail. And I would encourage you to look at culling some of that. Yeah, so that's the thing I would say. I probably was a horrible like offender of that. I also think that I did not probably quantify any of my bullet items. So that conducted research thing resonates with me. I probably just like conducted research and did in this lab and copy pasted from my lab website or something like that. But that tells you nothing as a reader. So.
And if you're all feeling a little sad about it, I've looked at, hundreds and hundreds of resumes for internships from college graduates. The tiny font and the crazy long list is very common. So the wisdom of your peers here, you can stand out in a crowd. I was always super impressed and shocked by the ones who actually curated it down to a more business resume, but we also did understand that you were new to applying to jobs. So don't stress out if you've sent out a resume like that.
You said you shouldn't include high school stuff in your resume, but how about on a CV? Do you have any opinions on that?
So yeah, I would say by the time you're sort of like needing to use a CV, probably I would not include it, unless there was something like particularly notable, like say you were doing research in high school and that resulted in a publication, like put that on your CV. But I would say like really when you need to start like really using a CV is if you're like in a PhD program, you're like really in the kind of academic route, if you really have started racking up presentations and academic publications. So for that, like at that point, I feel like you shouldn't really have your high school stuff on there unless there's something like particularly notable.
Thank you. I was just asking because I had to turn in a CV for an application this week, and I'm like, don't know.
Well, yeah, so like always do it sort of like relevant to like where your career stage is. Like it's a little, yeah, weird. I would say like my tip, if they're asking for a CV, take your resume, add in like presentation section, honors, and like publications. And also I would say like through grad school, I would say feel free to put ones that are in prep. Some people might disagree with that, but like the way academic publishing takes so long these days, like if you have a paper that you could give them something that looks vaguely like a draft, I think it's okay to list as in preparation. So yeah, so that's my kind of like quick and dirty way to sort of like make a resume CV hybrid, is just to kind of add those sections in and don't worry about the page limit.
I also have another brief question. When it comes to like creating that resume, what interface, I suppose, would you suppose would be best?
Can you clarify exactly what you mean by interface?
Yeah, I mean
specifically?
like Google Docs, Canva,
Yeah,
something.
okay. That's what I thought. Okay. So I think Microsoft Word is definitely the safe answer here from a formatting standpoint. Another tip is make sure that you're exporting a PDF before you actually submit. The formatting can get really messy when you go through some of these submission websites and stuff like that. So always a PDF. I mean, they'll say we accept Word or PDF or something like that. There's no other answer than PDF, and I think that the other panelists would agree. The other thing I would say though is that in Word you can set up templates that have very strict settings for, you know, whether it's margin or font size, or you basically turn a Word document into a grid, right? Kind of like it's overlaying an Excel spreadsheet onto Word. I recommend doing that as early as possible because the number of times I've edited my own resume and just wish that, you know, adding one space here didn't completely ruin all of my formatting is too high to count. So the earlier you set up a template that you really like, that makes sense for whatever industry you're going to be focusing on, the better. You will be editing it a lot, just like what Alex was saying about having a resume for as many applications as you have. If you consider how many you're about to apply to over the course of your life, it is worth the investment right now to set up the format in Microsoft Word and then always export to PDF.
I think that wraps us up. But again, thank you all for being here. I hope you have a good evening.